Yea, certain persons shall, in this divine dispensation, produce heavenly children, and such children shall promulgate the teachings of the beauty of Abha and serve his great cause. Through a heavenly power and spiritual confirmation, they shall be enabled to promote the word of God and to diffuse the fragrances of God. These children are neither Oriental nor Occidental, neither Asiatic nor American, neither European nor African, but they are of the kingdom. Their native home is heaven, and their resort is the kingdom of Abha. This is but the truth, and there is not after truth save superstitions or fancy. May all humanity welcome with open arms the children of the kingdom. Abdullaha.
So now I will introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save your questions until after the talk when we'll have our question and answer session. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, please fill out the Google form that I'll put in the chat. So our speaker this week is Miss Ridvan Idara, and her topic is How to Raise Children of the Kingdom. Ridvan Idara is the founder and executive director of New Era Creative Space, a nonprofit youth educational center whose mission is to inspire stronger communities through creative programs. NECS envisions strong communities that are vibrant, thriving, self-sustaining, and diverse, where young people are active agents of positive change, are enabled with the social-emotional skills to enact change, are empowered to take on leadership roles in their communities, are able and excited to nurture the next generation of visionary leaders. Guided by the belief in the oneness of humanity, Ridvan Idara has spent over 2 decades creating opportunities for young people to discover their unique strengths and talents and empower them to work towards their highest potential. Ridvan is an artist, educator, occupational therapist, and parenting coach. She has 2 adult children and resides in Peekskill, New York with her husband. She derives her spiritual inspiration from the writings of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith. She loves traveling, meeting and learning from people of different cultures, hiking, reading, and playing tennis. And with that, I'll hand it off to Miss Idara.
Thank you so much. I feel really humbled and honored to be here today to share what little I know about raising children with you all. I'm sure there are people here who have a lot of experience, perhaps more than I do, on this topic. So when Armin first sent me, invited me to speak, parenting is, I do parenting workshops, and it's something that it's part of my profession. And when she suggested the topic, I kind of looked over it and it's like, oh, children of the kingdom, that sounds a little daunting. And she gently nudged me to, I suggested another topic, and then she got me back to this topic and gently nudged me to do it. So here I am today, going to talk a little bit, share my understanding really of what this means in my own parenting of my children. So I have 2 lovely children who are now young adults. I can hardly believe it when I think of them. They're 20 and 23 years old already. And so some of the stories, I'll be sharing some stories about, my journey in this work as an educator, as a parent, as, a counselor for my children. And I hope it'll be meaningful to those of you that are here. So thank you for being here from wherever you are. All right, so how do we raise children of the kingdom? So I'm going to start by saying I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. I'm still working on it, but I will share with you, what is my inspiration, what works, and how I go about attempting to raise the children of the kingdom. So children of the kingdoms, for myself, as when my child, this is my daughter, when my son, who's older, was born, and I brought this beautiful child home, I was a bit overwhelmed by the prospect of raising this beautiful little fragile soul. being from the Baha'i, having been raised in the Baha'i faith, I grew up with a lot of Baha'i writings around this topic of education, and both of my parents were educators. And, the thing about, before you have children, it's very easy to look at other people. I know I was a bit arrogant about, my ideas about, parenting before I had children, because you look at other people and you think, or at least I do, I don't know about the rest of you, but I was a little bit arrogant to look at people and their children as like, oh, I'll do a better job when, I have a child, until I had a child. And then it's really humbling experience, because you realize, I thought I knew what patience was until, you have this soul. And I was really, in the beginning, I was really a little bit fearful of, the task, like this is God's trust. And I've been charged with raising this child. So I use the Baha'i writings as a guide for my parenting. And so for those of you who are here for the first time and don't know much about the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, and Abdul Baha, who happens to be his son, I'll be using a lot of their writings as the foundation for some of what this talk is going to be about. So here Abdul Baha says, children who are born in the cradle of love of God, who are nurtured by the breasts of the knowledge of God, and who are brought up in the bosom of the gift of God, and who are fostered in the lap of the training of God. Such children are those of whom it was said by Christ, verily they are the children of the kingdom. So for me to understand, what reading the Baha'i writings and learning more about education and what that means, the Baha'i writing states that we're here to know and to love God and to reflect the attributes of God, and the spiritual attributes of love, of kindness, of justice, and honesty, and it goes on and on. And Baha'u'llah says it is, but the indispensable basis of all of that is that the child, should develop spiritual characteristics and the praiseworthy virtues of humankind. This is the primary consideration. If, however, an individual has spiritual characteristics and virtues that shine out, and his purpose in life be spiritual, and his inclinations be directed towards God, and he also study other branches of knowledge, then we have light upon light, his outer being luminous, his private character radiance, his heart sound, his thought elevated, his understanding swift, his rank noble. And this by Abdul Baha. So really, as once I had children, I had to think about, how do I parent these children to have these characteristics? When you read about it, it seems, okay, I can do this. And then you have a child who has, is crying, is needy, has this character, and and you have to nurture them and raise them. It becomes a little bit more complicated than that. So I personally decided to dig deeper and learn, and really what the first thing that I learned was, in order to be a parent that raises children of the kingdom, which is really, in a nutshell, children that reflect the attributes of God, right? I had to look inward to myself, and start to I had to learn to be more patient. I had to learn to be kind. I had to learn, all of these things which we think we know until we have kids. And then, the things we just have to learn to look at ourselves in the mirror. And Baha'u'llah, in Baha'i writings, the station of those who are dedicated to spiritual education of children is really elevated. Abdul Baha says, "O thou teacher of the children of the kingdom, thou hast arisen to perform a service which would justly entitle thee to vaunt thyself over all the teachers on earth. For the teachers of this world make use of human education to develop the powers, whether spiritual or material, of humankind, whilst thou art training these children, these young plants, in the garden of God, according to the education of heaven, and art giving them the lessons of the kingdom. So the station of those who educate children is really raised in the Baha'i writings. And furthermore, we have here the education and training of children is amongst the most meritorious act of humankind, and draweth down the grace and favor of the All-Merciful. And for education is indispensable foundation of all human excellence. Abdul-Baha also, speaks to mothers and says, "O ye loving mothers, know ye that in God's sight, the best of all ways to worship him is to educate the children and train them in all of the perfections of humankind." So this is, these are the writings that, I'm reading as I'm looking at this little child, and I'm thinking, so how do I put that into practical, how do I actually do this, this job of raising these children to be spiritual minded, to be, to train them in all the perfections of humankind. And really it starts by training ourselves, because as parents, we are models. We have to model to our children, the behaviors that we want, to see in them. So we start, what I found is that, in raising my children, I had to really start to look at my own self and start to really work on that. So how do we raise the children of the kingdom? The Baha'i writings, for me, gives us a lens to start to look at children. So the first thing is to view children as noble. And so this lens of nobility is really a paradigm shift. Instead of, thinking of kids as sinful or troublemakers, or, the old paradigm of looking at kids, Baha'u'llah gives us a different lens. And this is this lens of nobility, where he says to us, "O son of spirit, noble have I created thee, yet thou hast abased thyself. Rise then unto that for which thou wast created." So I've thought a lot about this quote and used it in my parenting of my children. This idea that we are all created noble. Our children are noble. So that is their birthright. Nobility is our children's birthright. So this quote then, as I interpret it, it says that yet thou hast abased thyself. So we will make mistakes, and we do as human beings abase ourselves. But the beauty of it is we can rise, we can always rise then unto that for which we are created. So if nobility is our birthright and we do make mistakes, Baha'u'llah is calling us, reminding us that we can always rise unto that for which we are created. And then he also says in the hidden words, "O son of being, thou my lamp and my light is within thee. Get thou from it thy radiance and seek none other than me, for I have created thee rich and have bountifully shed my favors upon thee." So these are quotes that, I learned, I memorized actually growing up. And as I start to delve into this idea of raising the children of the kingdom, I start by sharing these quotes with my children at a very young age and memorizing it with them, and learning with them and accompanying them on their journey, on their spiritual journey, because this work is about spiritual education of young people. Oh, I think I'm going backwards. Okay. And then here we have a prayer where Baha'u'llah likens our children to plants of thine orchard, flowers of thy meadow, roses of thy garden. Let thy rain fall upon them. Let the sun of reality shine upon them with thy love. Let thy breeze refresh them. And then in order that they may be trained, grow, and develop and appear in the utmost beauty. And then Baha'u'llah also goes on to say that with the fingers of power I made thee, and with the fingers With the hands of power I made thee, and with the fingers of strength I created thee. And I've placed within thee, and within thee have I placed the essence of my life. Be thou content with it, and seek not else, for my work is perfect, and my command is binding. Question it not, nor have a doubt thereof. So imagine as a child growing up, I mean, for myself, I'll speak for myself, as a child growing up with these quotes, and there are other quotes in the Baha'i writings, like, oh God, guide me, protect me, give me a shining lamp and a brilliant stand. I remember growing up with these quotes as a child. It gave me such confidence, right? It gives me, Baha'u'llah is saying, God is saying, my work is perfect and my command is binding. It's these writings are telling me that I am created noble. So from a very young age, by my parents sharing these writings with me and having memorized these writings, I'm already developing this sense of, who I am as a spiritual being, and also what my station is and what my birthright of nobility is. And that, I'm in my imperfections, I am perfect because that's how I was made. I was beautifully made by my creator. So these are, and I found that as for myself growing up, it really empowered me and gave me a sense of grounding in who I am. So at a very young age, teaching my children and using these writings is the beginning stages of just trying to figure out how to raise our children in spiritual. And Baha'u'llah says education is a spiritual process, right? And here's this quote: regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value, that is our station, right? So what are these gems that we're going to mine, and how can we do that? How can education become that, alone? It says education can alone cause it to reveal. So what kind of education? So these are questions that, as a parent, I began to think, how do I mine those gems? We know they're in there, right? Thou and my lamp and my light is within thee. It's all in there. So how do we mine these gems, and so that it can reveal itself in the way our children behave? And he also states that, Abdul Baha states that spiritual education is the foundation of human happiness. And education is of three kinds: material, intellectual, and spiritual. Often we focus in our society on intellectual education, on book learning. And often in schools, we don't talk about spiritual, we don't talk about developing moral capacity. So we really have to look at education in a holistic way. And I think for me, that's what the Baha'i writings pushes me to do, to see a person as mind, body, and soul. And education, incidentally, comes from this word educare, which means to draw forth. Interestingly enough, Baha'u'llah talks about that in, education can alone cause it to reveal its splendors. And he says, regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. So education can actually draw forth those gems if we, learn how to do that. So spiritual parenting, then, when my kids were little, I formed this group in my home. And we called it, we met on a monthly basis. It was just a group of mothers and fathers sometimes with young children, because we're all grappling with this idea: how do we raise spiritually minded children? So we used to gather together once a month, and we called it the spiritual parenting group, and really talking about and diving deep into this concept of educating in a holistic way. And raising children of the kingdom is an approach to parenting that is spiritual, loving, nurturing, and supportive. Spiritual parenting acknowledges that every child is a unique and wondrous creation. And Baha'u'llah tells us that in Baha'i writings, that we are created rich, that the light is within us, that we are noble, right? And we as parents have been given this bounty of accompanying these children on their journey of realizing their own potential. So, and how do we do that? We really have to do it in a loving, nurturing, spiritual, and supportive ways. And I always think of the story of I listened to someone once a while ago talking about the acorn, the seed, and the oak tree, that the potential of the oak tree is already in that seed, right, to be an oak tree. But it's very important where you plant it. You cannot plant it in a climate that it won't grow. So how we tend, and Baha'u'llah, refers to children as, flowers of the garden. And he even refers to parents as gardeners, loving gardeners that tend this garden, which is a really beautiful image of parenting. This quote I found a long time ago, and I held on to it because it really spoke to me, but I don't know who wrote it. I tried to Google it, but couldn't find the author. Life is a sacred and spiritual journey. We are sacred and spiritual beings and can choose to embrace the perspective of parenting from a sacred place of our spirituality, the heart. Despite our religions or cultural preferences, spiritual parenting is about parenting with compassion and a giving heart. So as a parent, then, I start to, as I'm raising my children and learning, along the way, start to break down this, parenting, this holistic, what is this, adopting a holistic approach to parenting, So there are different ways in which, different kind of labels for parents, educator being one of them. As an educator, we draw forth those gems that are within them. We support them to grow through life's many challenges. We look for teachable moments. Life is for learning. Mistakes are for learning too. And Baha'u'llah gives us that beautiful picture that, we're created noble, and we always have that opportunity to rise to that for which we were created. Educate parents as authority. It's important that we set clear boundaries, that we find a kind and firm way of educating our children that is neither permissive nor dominant. The authority of a parent's teacher is in service to the child's learning, to help them develop their own inner authority, a sense of personal responsibility, and not to be confused with punitive authority. We live in a very punitive society, and often we go directly when children behave a certain way that is not acceptable. We tend to want to punish because they need to learn. And I'll tell this story of an incident that happened when my son was little that really changed my was really a huge shift to my parenting style. I come from a background parent. I'm from Nigeria originally, and there's very hitting a child is commonplace, and being really strict with a child because there's this emphasis on wanting to correct behavior, but in a very forceful way. And even here in America, I found that, I watch parents and I watch and I observe people, and it's always very punitive. Our system is very punitive in general. And I think it's worldwide. But it was just what my son was, I would imagine, a few years old, maybe 4 or 5 years old at the time. And my daughter was a baby, maybe 2, I'm guessing. But the story stands out in my mind because it was just one of those days where I was, it's hard to juggle 2 kids when they're little, and, try to also maintain a clean house and and stuff. And it was just one of those days where I felt very accomplished because, you know, my daughter was fed and bathed, and my son was, you know, playing, and I even managed to make my bed and my bedroom, and everything was just like the calm before the storm. And, you know, shortly after, I walked into my bedroom and it was a total disaster. It was a mess. And, you know, and I looked at it, and my first reaction was to, because I knew who was the culprit, you know, little boy, little 5-year-old boy. And my first instinct was to, you know, yell at him or put him in timeout or do any of those things that parents do when a child misbehaves. But instead, I took a deep breath and I decided to ask him what he was doing. And he lit up and proceeded to explain how he had made a slide and you know, a whole engineering feat, you know, he had kind of done there. And when I stopped for a moment to look at what he was doing from his perspective, he was in this process of creating. He was, you know, in this process of problem solving and figuring things out. And, you know, he had taken a mattress from a crib that someone had given me when my son was born, which I never used, but it became a great storage space. He got the mattress out, it was a slide, and he had this whole playground he had created out of the bedroom that I had just cleaned. And it made me really realize that children, you know, oftentimes we say things like, you know, this child is trying to get me, or kids are doing things to us, right? You know, this young boy was just in his own process. He had no idea how much time I had spent cleaning my, you know, room. He wasn't standing there in the corner waiting for me to be done so that he can take it all apart. He saw an opportunity to create and he took it. And so it really just stopping to ask him, you know, what he was doing, I got to walk into his mind and see from his perspective what he was up to. And so we came up with an agreement that after he was done creating, together we would get the room back to the way it was. So then my need to have my room clean would be fulfilled, and he will have had time to, you know, be creative and explore. Now, had I punished him instead of asking what was going on, I would have failed to you know, realize just how creative he was being. And also, I would have sent a message to this 5-year-old kid that this home is not a home where you can be creative, that my need to have my room clean was more important than him exploring, than him being curious, than him being learning. So we both, in the end, we both got what we needed from this engagement without, you know, the punitive, authoritative response to what he had done. So as parents, we also guides, right? We want to honor their spirit. We want to share our knowledge and wisdom and skills, our stories. We have to create routines, special time, spiritual practice. For us, our spiritual practice started with like daily prayers and memorizing these prayers. For me, because growing up, these prayers really gave me a strong sense of who I am as a spiritual being. And I felt like that was such a gift that my parents gave me, and passing that on to my children to also have them learn in a really natural way. And routines are really great things for families to do. Parent as counselor, you know, help children make moral choices, seek first to understand and then be understood. The instruction of these children is even as the work of a loving gardener who tended his plants in the flowering fields of the Almighty. And I love these like visual images of what it means to be a parent. So, but Abdul-Baha also cautions us. He's, you know, parenting is the greatest of all services. But he also says it's very difficult to undertake this service, even harder to succeed in it. And then goes on to tell us that I hope thou will acquit thyself well in this most important task of tasks, and successfully carry the day and become an ensign of God's abounding grace. So for me, that meant to really, to study, to learn from, I was fortunate to have mentors and teachers to teach me to be better at this work, at this task of parenting my own children. And I think, for every profession in the world, we get a lot of training, but we do not get training to become parents. And so for me, it was really important that I seek those workshops and training and talk to people and read and really delve into the Baha'i writings, and also learn from, other thought people who wrote books about parenting that kind of fit my, that were in, what's the word? That kind of reflected some of what the Baha'i writings were, what I was gaining from the Baha'i writings, because there are a lot of really great authors out there about that have written about parenting. So then the next, the next thing to think about is discipline, right? Because part of parenting is discipline, and traditional discipline, which is the, old toolbox, is punishing, lecturing, yelling, taking away privileges, bribes, threats. I just, we shame them, spanking, criticizing. And this is the way in which a lot of parenting, the way in which people parent. But when I read the Baha'i writings and I study it, and I study other ways of raising the children, and really listening to, diving deep into the Baha'i writings, realize that, Baha'i writings is calling for a paradigm shift, right? Where discipline is a tool in which we mine those gems, in which we look for teachable moments, where we can encourage, we can actively listen to our children, give them opportunities to problem solve, to inquire, to see with their own eyes and not through the eyes of their neighbors, and know of their own neighbors. We get this opportunity to treat them with dignity. We can parent and they are, and learn them about consequences of their behaviors, to, kind and firm parenting, connecting before we correct. But always recognizing the nobility in each individual, and keeping dignity intact in the way that we parent. And that is, a way in which we mine those gems. We model to our children, the way that we, behaviors that we want to see in them. So this discipline actually comes from the Latin word discipulus, which means pupil, and disciplina, which means teaching and learning. So discipline is really about teaching. It's about finding, for me, it became about finding those teachable moments, right? Alternative disciplines, we are looking for an alternative discipline method that focuses on developing virtues and problem-solving skills, teaches empathy through mutually respected teaching tools, and maintaining connection between children and parents. So it's this, back and forth. For me, raising my children a lot of it became just learning, and alongside them, accompanying them in their journey, and yet, parenting them, because I think it's really important that we parent our children, that we teach them. So some of the parenting tools that worked for me personally, I've talked a lot about nobility and recognizing their nobility, but also recognizing our nobility, right? I think it starts there, that we recognize our own nobility. And I remember another story from, my children are, as kids, they fought with each other often. And little Zia often got beat by Jared. He just happened to be bigger. So, but she learned to fight and hold her own after a while. But it was this moment where, they had gone into one of their, little altercations, and Zia's crying and Jared is like, all mad and whatever. And I just, and I looked at him and I said to him, this is not who you are. This is not who you are. And then I remember saying to him, listing some of the virtues and expectations. Of course, he's little and is completely confused, but anyway, we worked out, what was going on, listening to them, and getting them to like make amends and figure it out, problem solve, figure out what's going on. But always, there were so many times when, as my kids were growing up, just like reminding them of their nobility, that they can rise, whatever it is that's going on, they can rise to that for which they were created, and reminding them of the light within them. And modeling behaviors, often as parents, a story that I tell often is, because I've heard it, I've seen it happen many, many times, is this, simple thing. If someone calls and your child picks up the phone and you don't want to talk to that person, for instance, I've seen this many times where the parents will then say, tell them I'm not around or something to the child, who then, and they're clearly around, and I often, in parenting workshops, these are some of the, things that we talk about. We really break down, some of the things that we do. And when we're talking about modeling behaviors, and something simple like that doesn't seem like a big deal, but we've just taught our children how to lie. Because we could also tell them to say to the person who's on the other line that, tell them that mom or dad is not available at the moment, and we'll get back to them when they, just simple things like that, which we don't even think about. I don't think is intentional, but, I've had this conversations with parents how they just like say things that are not true, but have their children repeat that. And then, but when their children lie, yell at them, or we have these expectations that our children will always be truthful, but there are many times in which we may not necessarily be truthful, and under the guise of white lies or whatever that means, using the language of the virtues. Linda Popov wrote a beautiful book called The Virtues Guide, which I used a lot when my kids were little. I referred to it a lot and I highly recommend it. But she talks about in that book, using the language of the virtues. And an example that stuck out to me is this: instead, when kids are being rude, so to speak, we often tell them not to be rude, right? Or when they're behaving a certain way, we ask them not to behave that way. But in her book, The Virtues Guide, she talks about, we can ask children to be polite because that's what we want from them. Or we can tell them to stop being rude. If we keep repeating to a child, stop being rude, eventually all they hear is that they're rude. Mom thinks I'm rude. But asking a child to be polite, or asking them to be peaceful, or, telling them what the expectations are, is so much greater than telling them what not to do, because you're not actually, especially when they're really young, you don't give them, if you tell a child not to be rude, you're not asking them to be polite, because polite is really what you want them to be. So Linda's book is really great at giving us tools about how to use the language of the virtues, because that's really what we want from them. We want to mine those gems, those virtues that they have within them. We want to raise the standard for them, listening to them empathetically, validating their feelings, connecting with them first before we correct them. We often, we're so afraid that if we don't punish, or if we're not punitive immediately, that our kids will become terrible people, when we really need to stop and listen and validate their feelings first, and then figure out what is the solution. To me, parenting is really, especially when it comes to misbehavior, the goal is to find a teachable moments. Like, I want, what is the learning here? What can we learn from this incident? And having our children be a part of figuring that out together with us. Accustoming, the Baha'i writing talks about accustoming our children to hardship. Because oftentimes we want to, as parents, we want to, we want them to be safe. We want them to not get hurt. We often want to do for them more than we need to do for them. And we're asked to accustom them to hardship because it helps build character. And I've seen, in small ways, accustoming my kids to hardship, builds resilience, and it helps them figure out ways to problem solve, to figure things out, even just in little ways when they were younger, just like not, we live in a society where we want immediate gratification of things, teaching kids to be patient, to wait, asking them to be patient when, if you're busy and they're looking for something, just little ways in which we can accustom them to, to hardship, or to learn and grow these virtues, family rituals, being flexible, like that story I told you about, the bad incident, just the ability to be flexible enough to say, hey, I'm okay with having my child do this for now, and then later we can fix it together, right? Takes detachment, giving of our time, being just and investigating truth. I just threw a few things here that I've found helpful in my parenting journey. And but it's exhaustive. There's so many different tools that one can use. And the Baha'i Universal House of Justice, which is the governing body of the Baha'is of the world. I love this quote from them that I often go back to remind me of this, task of raising children and the station of children. It goes, children are the most precious treasure a community can possess, for in them are the promise and guarantee of the future. They bear the seeds of the character of future society, which is largely shaped by what the adults constituting the community do or fail to do with respect to children. They are trust no community can neglect with impunity, an all-embracing love of children, the manner of treating them, the quality of attention shown them, the spirit of adult behavior toward them. These are all among the vital aspects of the requisite attitude. Love demands discipline, the courage to accustom children to hardship, not to indulge their whims or leave them entirely to their own devices. An atmosphere needs to be maintained in which children feel that they belong to the community and share in its purpose. And on that note, I will stop speaking and open it to questions.
Thank you so much for your talk, Ms. Idara. I found it really, really nice how there's just so many different approaches, and I feel like there's an answer for every situation that might come up. And I sometimes think about, oh, how am I going to be a parent in the future? But this gives me hope, I guess. So we can open it up to questions now. So if you have a question, you can write it in the chat and I'll read it out. So yeah, I'll pause for questions. I can get us started because I have a question. I wanted to know, like, what would you say it had been your biggest challenge raising your kids, and how did you overcome it?
My biggest challenge. That's a good question. I just feel like parenting in general, I mean, it's just like I feel like I've kind of muddled through it over the years. And but challenges that for me, the biggest challenge is I often feel like I'm swimming against swimming upstream, so to speak, because we live in a society which, trying to raise children of the kingdom is not easy. Oftentimes I feel like I've been criticized about, just the way I handle my kids, especially when they misbehave. Um, I take the time to kind of figure out what is going on first before, and it's not always the case with other people. I've often been criticized for being weak as a parent, that not being more heavy-handed with my kids. And yeah, I struggle in that. I feel that I'm always, swimming in the opposite direction, because many times, my kids will go to other people's homes and, oh, they're allowed to do this. And then like, but that's not what we do in our home. And just holding on to my values, because we live in a society, where, a lot of people have different ways of raising their children that I don't often agree with, or it's not in, it doesn't feel like it's an agreement with my values. So that's my biggest challenge, I think, is raising a child in today's society.
That makes sense. We have a question that asks, how do I gently, lovingly, and effectively guide a parent who routinely raises their voice or physically punishes their child? They reject my suggestions.
Oh man, Ruha, that's a tough one. I don't know if if you have kids, or so I don't know the context, right? But I would say a lot is in modeling too, because people don't like to be told to do things a certain way, especially if they feel, because I often get from people, my parents beat me up, so and I turned out okay. What do you say to that? I turned out okay. People don't like being told what. I think modeling, and a lot of times people, because I've been criticized before for how I, deal with my children's misbehavior. But I think over time and watching as my children have grown, and people begin to see the benefits of, of raising them a certain way. And so I don't know that I have the answer to that, other than that you model to them and be patient with them. And yeah, because it's tough. It's tough to tell people how to raise their children, right? Or maybe even share some writings with them. But yeah, that's a tough one. Then maybe someone else has a solution to that.
Our next question asks, what beauty do you see in the onset of gentle parenting? How common is this new mindset, even without the spiritual backing? It's becoming as a resounding recognition of children being seen as full beings instead of banks laying empty, awaiting the knowledge, especially considering children have knowledge to give in return.
I mean, I see it even, I have friends. I remember I said a little bit about the spiritual parenting group that I gathered together in my house, and there was and it was a really diverse group, religiously diverse and racially diverse group of parents and their children. And we were all grappling with this idea of, raising kids to be spiritually minded. And I'm seeing more of it. I think people are beginning to recognize that, what we've been doing is not working. And so people are looking for answers, and they're noticing that it actually works. It works to spiritually to raise our children. And so yeah, I see it. Some people may not have the spiritual backing in that they may not believe in God, or may not practice a certain religion, but they're certainly raising their children to be virtuous. They are modeling for their children. And I think it's all the same. And they're working to, because I had friends who didn't necessarily believe in religion or God, but they showed up for our spiritual parenting workshops, and we just talked about and shared, what worked, what didn't work, or we'd be like, oh, that worked last week, but this week it didn't work. What do we do? And so I think things are changing, and people are beginning to recognize that the way we've been going as a humanity is not working.
Thank you. Our next question asks, Baha'u'llah advises to protect children from associating with the ungodly people. How can we reconcile with the message of unity and accepting of all when advising our children?
Wow, such deep questions. It's all about context, right? For me anyway, it's all about context, and being careful, like, who do we label as ungodly, and are there those people in which we can gently love them also, and bring them into the fold, because a lot of people just need, they're those people who are really could potentially be really negative influences for our children. And so as a parent, we have to make those choices, right? Because, for me, I'll just speak for myself. There were situations in which based on my child's character and this other person, where they weren't being, bringing out the best in each other. So, there's situations in which I limit that interaction, right? But at the same time, finding ways in which to draw people in and to love them, because we're also, the Baha'i writings, there's more than just that one quote. There's also quotes in which we are asked to, love people. Abdu'l-Baha talks about forgiving 1,000 times. What does that even look like, So I think it really depends on context, and it also, there are times we need to remove ourselves from certain situations, especially if we can't, handle them, or we find that it's causing a really negative effect on ourselves or our children. But I think we don't give up on people. I think we still try to draw them in through love and compassion.
Thank you. Our next question asks, how important is it to censor TV, movies, games, etc.?
For me, I'll just speak for myself. I censored it a lot when my kids were little. I really believe kids learn and grow and flourish in nature. So we were out a lot, and just got them away from the TV as much as possible. I do have a background in occupational therapy. And what we're finding is that a lot of kids, because of the media, the TV and games, and not going outdoors, we are finding things that are, kids, their sensory, when they're outdoors and they're exploring and they're learning and growing, they're building these foundational skills to be able to read, to develop their core strength, to like for reading, for instance, when you're outdoors, your oculomotor skills, your eyes, these are all technical things, you know, you're going back and forth. When you're climbing on a jungle gym, you're building core strength in your body, but your fine motor skills, which helps you with writing and stuff. But when kids are in front of the TV all the time, it really reduces their ability. Your body learns by trial and error, right? And if you're not out, the job of a child is to play. They should not be sitting in front of the TV for hours, because they should be developing other skills. And nature is also so beautiful and healing. And there's a lot of research around why children should not be sitting in front of screens all the time. So I censored it. So there's that, you know, developmental aspect of it, but there's also the information that's coming to them, right? Kids are, I went to a workshop. I was in a workshop a couple of days ago, and it talks about how young kids are exposed to porn as early as 7 years old now because of the exposure on TV. So there's that too. So I think it's really important to censor how much TV, games, and movies that our children watch, especially in the formative years when they're just like soaking in everything and learning. And, you know, that's when we should be giving them, you know, other forms. And kids love to play and be outdoors and do other things. And I know we live in a fast-paced society, and sometimes we're tired and exhausted and it's hard, but if possible, I'm a big proponent for censoring TV and movies and games.
Thank you. The next question asks, what does it mean that we are noble beings, and how do you teach that to your children?
And so for me, you know, if you look up the word nobility, right, it's, you know, I think Baha'u'llah is referring to spiritually noble, right? So if you look at the word noble itself, and you think of kings, right, and the high station of it's really about the high station of the spiritual station of an individual. And for me, teaching it as a Baha'i, using the Baha'i writings first, is teaching them that they are special, that they are children of God, that they were created to be loving, to be kind. I think you teach them nobility by first seeing your own nobility, seeing the nobility in yourself is very important, so that they see it in you and in themselves, and they can begin to see that they have all those qualities of love and kindness and empathy and all of it within them. Yeah, I mean, that is just, you know, and to teach that to your children. I mean, a lot of what I've talked about in this presentation is geared at teaching them to see the nobility in themselves, you know.
Thank you. The next question is, I personally found having my kids memorize lots and lots of very long prayers when they were young very beneficial. What are your thoughts?
I found it to be beneficial too. For myself, and growing up, I learned a lot of prayers. And honestly, when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, I just, you know, didn't value it as much as I started to as an adult. Because then I think growing up, my parents, you know, had us memorizing prayers, and then I went to a high school and we memorized more prayers, and so I have all these prayers in my mind that I've memorized from childhood. As an adult, I can't memorize a thing now, but I can't forget any of what I memorized as a child. But what I find beneficial about that is that in moments when I'm feeling, down, for instance, there's a Baha'i prayer that says, refresh and gladden my spirit, purify my heart, illumine my powers. I lay all my affairs in thy hand, thou art my guide and my refuge. I know this by memory. When I need it, I pull on it. Or when I'm scared, I have, oh God, guide me, protect me, make of me a shining star and a brilliant lamp. Or, I have so many prayers I memorized as a child, and now I call on as an adult when life throws me these curves that I find difficult to deal with. So just from personal experience, I feel like it's so important. When I'm scared, I might in my mind repeat, is there any remover of difficulty save God? Say, praise be God, he is God, all thy servants and all us abide by his bidding, and it calms me down. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of memorizing prayers when they're young, because Lord, I can't memorize anything now. Everything I know I have memorized is from when I was little, and kids just soak things up and are able to remember.
Yeah, my mom had me memorize things like that when I was young too. Whenever I'm trying to make a decision, I always remember the long quote from Baha'u'llah, be generous in prosperity, and it helps me.
So just quickly, I just wanted to say, I just pulled up nobility. I don't know if I answered that well, but in the dictionary, it says the quality of being noble in character, mind, birth, and rank. And I think Baha'u'llah is referring to the spiritual nobility, right? The spiritual qualities to be. I think Armin says that I feel that those prayers and writings are forever in the minds and souls and help them now that they are young adults. Yeah. Will there be a part 2?
Will there be a part 2? That's a good question.
That remains to be seen.
If we don't have any more questions, then I want to thank you again, Ms. Idara, for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and I think everyone else learned a lot and enjoyed it too. So thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me, and I wish this was beneficial to you all.
Of course, it was really beneficial. Hopefully we can have you back again in the future.
Thanks.
So now I will announce our speaker for next week. Our speaker next week is going to be Miss Kathy Lee, and her topic is From Segregation to Unity, My Personal Story. And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern time. So please invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to the mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I'll put in the chat now. Thank you for joining, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Have a good week. Bye.